What your grandparents built and knew about rot protection has been quietly erased from modern construction, and it is costing homeowners billions. $10 billion a year in moisture damage. 1 in 3 homes report water intrusion. Meanwhile, houses built a century ago stay dry. The difference comes down to a single material swap that no one told you about. Moisture damage is not a niche concern. It is the single most expensive source of residential loss in the US, with over $10 billion paid out each year just to repair rot, mold, and hidden water intrusion. This is not an isolated trend. Industry surveys and insurance data converge on a blunt fact. About 1 in 3 American homes will experience water damage serious enough to file a claim. The odds are not in the homeowner's favor. The median age of a US house now stands at 42 years, with more than half built since 1970, precisely the era when these failures began to accelerate. For most families, the numbers translate into direct risk. The average water damage claim comes in at nearly $14,000, but repair costs often escalate to $20 or even $37 per square foot once rot spreads into framing and sheathing. These are not cosmetic problems. Moisture finds its way behind siding, under roof lines, and into wall cavities, quietly undermining the structure until the damage is extensive and costly. Maya, a forensic building consultant, sees the reality up close. She reviews new rot cases every week. These are cases where roofs are less than 20 years old, or where a single failed flashing sends water into the walls for years before anyone notices. She points to a pattern. The vast majority of these failures occur in homes built after the shift to cheaper materials and faster construction methods. This is not a weather problem, it is a materials and methods problem driven by industry decisions that traded long-term durability for short-term savings. For homeowners, the stakes are clear. Understanding what changed is the first step to protecting the only asset most families cannot afford to lose. Maya stands in front of 2 wall studs, one cut from an original 1920s house, the other a modern piece pulled from a recent build. The difference is immediate. The old-growth stud feels heavier in the hand, its grain pattern so tight it is almost impossible to count the rings without a magnifier. In the Douglas fir sample, there are over 50 growth rings per inch, each ring a record of slow, dense growth. Modern lumber, by contrast, shows wide, pale bands and a rougher, lighter feel. This is plantation pine, grown in just a few decades with barely 20 rings per inch. The Forest Products Laboratory has tracked these differences for decades, so old-growth species like Douglas fir and heart pine reach specific gravities above 0.58, with late wood making up nearly 40% of each cross-section. The result is a frame that shrugs off moisture. Lab decay tests show that old-growth lumber loses half as much mass to fungi as modern plantation wood. In controlled experiments, old-growth heartwood exposed to brown rot fungi lost less than 5% of its mass after 12 weeks. Modern lumber, under the same conditions, lost 3 times more. Field surveys confirm the lab results. Century-old homes built with these dense studs still show original framing intact and dry even after decades of roof leaks or minor flashing failures. The secret is in the wood itself, high density, tight grain, and a natural chemistry that resists decay. Before copper and other external protections even come into play, these houses started with a built-in buffer against moisture. For homeowners, the anatomy of the framing is not just a historical curiosity. It is the first and most overlooked line of defense against rot. Copper's role in old homes extends far beyond durability. When rainwater washes over copper flashing, trace amounts of copper ions leach into the wood below. Laboratory research published in 2008 found that even a concentration as low as 0.5 parts per million of copper in timber can completely suppress the growth of serpullar lacrymans, the fungus responsible for most dry rot in American homes. Field measurements from preserved houses from the 1920s show copper ion levels of 0.8 parts per million in wood adjacent to original flashings, confirming that this antifungal barrier persists for decades. Meyer points to a lab graph. The growth curve for Serpula lacrymans flattens to zero above the 0.5 parts per million threshold, while untreated wood becomes riddled with fungal colonies in just weeks. This passive protection was never advertised in old building manuals, but it proved decisive. Where copper, flashing and gutters remain, rot is almost unheard of, even after decades of leaks or neglect. Remove copper from the assembly and the wood loses its invisible shield, leaving it exposed to every drop of water that slips past the outer shell. The next section will show how this quiet safeguard disappeared from modern construction and what was lost in the process. Copper's quiet protection did not vanish by accident. After World War II, the American housing market faced a tidal wave of demand. The Housing Act of 1949 poured federal money into mass-produced suburbs, rewarding speed and low upfront cost above all else. In Levittown, crews assembled entire houses in under 16 minutes. That achievement left no room for labour-intensive copper work. Material costs mattered more than durability. Between 1948 and 1955, copper prices jumped by 45%, while aluminum and galvanized steel offered a 30 to 70% savings per linear foot. Developers, under pressure to deliver homes quickly and cheaply, swapped out copper for these lighter, cheaper metals at scale. The shift was not just economic, it became regulatory. Building codes amended in the 1950s and the 1960s formally approved non-copper flashings, provided they met minimal thickness and corrosion standards. Trade associations lobbied for these changes, citing material shortages and the need for affordable housing. The result was that aluminum and vinyl replaced copper in millions of homes and the industry moved on. Meyer holds up a 1950s tract house spec sheet. Copper is gone, replaced by sheet aluminum and tar paper. The decision chain was clear. Cost-cutting, not climate, drove the swap. The long-term risk to homeowners was baked in from the start, setting the stage for the compounded failures that followed with modern sheathing materials. Meyer presses her thumb along the edge of an OSB panel, removed from a recent repair. The board's surface is rough and uneven, swollen nearly 3% at the edge, a measurement confirmed by the 2.8% figure from Louisiana State University's humidity tests. Plywood under the same conditions swells less than half as much, just 1.2%. The difference is not cosmetic. OSB's oriented strands trap water deep inside the panel, holding onto 30% more moisture by weight than plywood after repeated wetting and drying cycles. Once water slips past failed flashing, OSB becomes a silent reservoir, feeding rot into framing that remains hidden until the damage is severe. Warranty data from a meta-analysis of major builders show the real cost. OSB-sheathed homes file rot-related repair claims at a rate of 1.9% per year, nearly triple the 0.7% seen in plywood homes. Meyer points to the swollen edge. This is how failures spread behind the walls, invisible to a standard inspection. The numbers make one thing clear. When water finds its way in, OSB helps it stay, accelerating decay that homeowners rarely see coming. Home inspection standards, as written by Ashi and Internachi, are built around what can be seen and touched: cracked shingles, water stains, peeling paint. But rot does not advertise itself on the surface. Meyer points to the numbers. Insurance audits show that 62% of flashing-related defects go completely undetected during standard visual inspections. That means only the visible third is ever flagged before damage spreads. Forensic engineering surveys add another layer. 38% of successful rot claims involve concealed failures, hidden behind brick, stucco, or finished drywall where visual checks offer no warning at all. The checklist approach gives a false sense of security, missing backward installed flashing, missing diverters, or poorly lapped tar paper until the damage is severe and costly. For homeowners, the gap is not just technical, it is financial. Preventing rot requires seeing past the surface, but the industry's own standards keep most of the risk hidden until it is too late. A copper retrofit is not just a historical nod, it is a calculated investment. According to the National Roofing Contractors Association, replacing modern aluminum or vinyl flashings with copper across a typical 2,400 square foot roof costs between $12,000 and $18,000. Full remediation for hidden rot when it strikes averages $20,000 to $35,000. The difference is not just in the price tag, but in the outcome. A copper upgrade can save $8,000 to $17,000 over the life of the home, not to mention the disruption and loss that come with structural repairs. Meyer's checklist is direct. First, inspect for copper at all roof-to-wall joints, valleys and kick-out points. If missing, budget for a copper retrofit at the next roof cycle. Second, prioritize replacement of OSB sheathing with plywood or fiber cement when walls are open. Third, demand moisture mapping, not just visual checks before closing up. For most homeowners, these are the steps that turn evidence into action and restore the long-term resilience that modern shortcuts have quietly erased. Moisture damage is not a weather event, it is a consequence of industry shortcuts and profit-driven substitutions. Every year, $10 billion in preventable rot is baked into new construction. Homeowners are left footing the bill. Until durability outweighs speed and cost, the cycle continues. Demand better. Your house depends on it.